AITA for walking out of Christmas dinner after my parents gave my sister a car. Growing up, my older sister, Rachel, was always the golden child. She was 3 years older than me and seemed to shine in my parents' eyes from the moment she was born. I was the quieter, more independent one, content to play by myself or spend time with my books. But as we grew up, the favoritism became more and more apparent. Rachel got the best clothes, the trendy ones that everyone in school envied. When we went shopping, Mom would gush over how something looked on her and insist she try it on, while I was left to pick through the sale rack. She got extra money for outings with her friends, while I was told to save my allowance if I wanted to do something similar. Even the attention at family gatherings seemed to gravitate toward her. She was the one my parents bragged about, the one who could do no wrong. I tried not to let it bother me too much. I told myself that I was strong, that I didn't need anyone to hand me anything. I focused on my studies, got my first job as soon as I could, and learned to budget early. By the time I moved out at 22, I felt like I was finally carving out a life for myself, on my own terms. Rachel, meanwhile, still lived at home. She worked remotely, so there wasn't much urgency for her to leave. My parents didn't seem to mind, they loved having her around. Over the years, I saved every penny I could. My biggest goal was to buy a car. I was tired of relying on public transportation or borrowing rides from friends. A car symbolized independence to me. It was something I could own outright, something I worked hard for. My parents knew this. I'd talk about it often, sharing updates about how close I was to my savings goal. They'd even joke about how maybe one day they'd pitch in to help me out. I never took it seriously, but it felt good to dream for a moment that they'd support me in the same way they always seemed to support Rachel. Then came Christmas. Christmas had always been a big deal in our family. My parents would go all out with decorations, a massive tree, and a feast that could feed an army. Rachel and I would spend the morning helping Mom in the kitchen while Dad played his favorite Christmas albums. That year was no different. I arrived early, arms full of carefully wrapped gifts. I was excited to see everyone and had even splurged a bit to get Rachel a nice scarf I thought she'd love. Despite everything, I wanted to make the day special. After dinner, we gathered around the tree for presents. As usual, my parents played Santa, handing out gifts one by one. When it was Rachel's turn, my dad stood up and made an announcement. "We've got a very special gift for you this year, Rachel," he said with a grin, handing her a small box. Rachel opened it, and inside was a set of car keys. For a moment, I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was a joke, or a gesture, like they'd bought her a fancy keychain. But then Dad continued, "It's parked in the driveway. Brand new. All yours." I felt like the room spun. A car. A brand new car. For Rachel. She didn't even need one, she worked from home and rarely went anywhere except to run errands with Mom. Meanwhile, I'd been saving for years, working my ass off, dreaming of the day I could finally afford my own car. And they knew that. They knew how much it meant to me. I couldn't stop myself. The words came out before I could think. "Why would you buy her a car when you know I've been saving for one?" The room went silent. My mom gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles she always used when she thought I was being dramatic. "She's the oldest," she said simply. "She deserves it." Deserves it? The words hit me like a slap. My dad chimed in, "And you're doing great on your own. We're sure you'll get there." I felt the tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of them. "Wow," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay." I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. I didn't even look back. I just got in my rideshare and left. The rest of the night, my phone blew up with messages from family members. My mom texted, calling me ungrateful and saying I'd ruined Christmas. My aunt chimed in, saying I'd embarrassed my parents in front of everyone. Rachel sent a text, too, "I didn't even ask for the car. You made things so awkward by storming out like that." Not once did my parents reach out to check on me. Not once did they consider how I might feel, sitting there watching them give my sister a gift that represented everything I'd been working toward for years. Instead, they made me the villain for leaving. Update 1. After that disastrous Christmas, I went low contact with my family. The emotional toll of that night lingered for weeks, and I knew I needed time to process everything. My family had always treated me as if I were the self-sufficient one, capable of handling everything without their support. But that night had driven home just how little they valued my efforts or even acknowledged my struggles. I wasn't just the independent one, I was the overlooked one, the one they assumed could fend for herself because they were too busy propping up Rachel. Rachel, unsurprisingly, tried reaching out a few more times. Her messages all carried the same undertone: I didn't ask for the car, but you overreacted. She seemed intent on shifting the narrative, as though I'd been the unreasonable one for feeling hurt. There was no apology, no attempt at understanding. Just the same dismissive, self-centered attitude I had come to expect. I stopped replying to her texts. I didn't have the energy to engage in another cycle of justifying my feelings while she refused to acknowledge them. 2 weeks after Christmas, my dad called me out of the blue. I hesitated before answering. Part of me hoped he was finally reaching out to apologize, but deep down, I knew better. My dad wasn't the type to admit fault, especially when it came to his treatment of Rachel versus me. Sure enough, the conversation wasn't about Christmas at all. Instead, he launched into a story about how Rachel had accidentally scraped the car while pulling out of a parking spot. The damage, according to him, was pretty bad, a dent and some scratches that would cost a few $100s to fix. He talked about it as though she'd totaled the car, making it sound like an insurmountable financial burden. And then came the real kicker: he asked if I could lend Rachel some money to help cover the repair costs. His reasoning: "You're good at managing your finances." I was stunned. Here I was, the daughter who had spent years meticulously saving for a car, something Rachel had been handed on a silver platter, and now they wanted me to bail her out? The audacity was almost laughable. This was the same family that had watched me scrape by without offering so much as a hint of support, and now they were asking me to step in because Rachel, the golden child, needed help. I didn't even bother to hide my disgust. Without hesitation, I told him, "Ask the golden child," and hung up. That call solidified my resolve to distance myself. It was the final straw in a long line of moments where I felt like I was expected to be the responsible one, the one who could handle everything without help, while Rachel was coddled and supported at every turn. I decided I was done playing that role. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work and my savings. My focus shifted entirely to myself and my goals. It was liberating, even if it was lonely at times. Without the weight of my family's constant judgments and favoritism hanging over me, I began to feel lighter. I also started therapy, something I'd been putting off for far too long. My therapist helped me unpack years of resentment and hurt that I hadn't fully acknowledged. She showed me how to set boundaries, how to prioritize my own well-being, and, most importantly, how to stop seeking validation from people who had never been willing to give it. Therapy wasn't an easy process. Confronting my feelings meant reliving a lot of painful memories, moments where I'd felt invisible in my own family. But it also helped me see how much strength I'd developed over the years. I realized that I didn't need their approval. I had built a life for myself without their help, and I was capable of continuing to do so. Then, in March, it finally happened. After years of saving and planning, I bought my first car. It wasn't new or flashy, just a used Honda Civic that was clean, reliable, and within my budget. But to me, it was perfect. Sitting behind the wheel for the first time, I felt a wave of emotions that I hadn't expected. Pride, relief, even a little disbelief. I had done this. I had worked hard, stayed disciplined, and achieved a goal that had once felt so far out of reach. I cried as I drove it off the lot, not because it was anything extravagant, but because it was mine. Every part of that car represented my perseverance, my independence, and my refusal to let anyone else define my worth. I didn't tell my family about the car. It wasn't their win to celebrate. Sharing the news with them would have felt hollow, like giving them credit for something they hadn't supported. Instead, I called a few close friends, people who had cheered me on throughout the process, and shared the news with them. Their excitement was genuine and heartfelt, and it reminded me that I had a support system outside of my family. Owning a car changed my life in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't just about the convenience of having my own transportation, it was about the freedom and independence it represented. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without relying on anyone else. I started taking small road trips on weekends, exploring nearby towns and nature trails. Each drive felt like a celebration of everything I had worked for, a reminder that I was capable of building the life I wanted. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed another shift in myself. The resentment I had carried toward my family began to fade. Not because they had changed, they hadn't, but because I no longer needed their validation. I had stopped looking to them for approval, stopped waiting for them to acknowledge my efforts or apologize for their favoritism. The distance I had created wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I had let go of the hope that they would change, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the constant disappointment of waiting for something that would never come. Rachel still occasionally sent texts, but they were brief and superficial, updates about her life or attempts to rope me into family events. I rarely responded. My parents, too, reached out occasionally, but their messages were similarly empty, focused on mundane topics like the weather or family gossip. There were no apologies, no meaningful attempts to mend the relationship. And that was fine. Update 2. Months went by, and I stuck to my plan of keeping my distance from family events. Birthdays, Mother's Day, random Sunday dinners, I skipped them all. The space felt good, like I could finally breathe without the weight of their expectations and favoritism pressing down on me. I poured my energy into work, hobbies, and making memories with friends who actually valued me. My little Honda Civic became my symbol of freedom, and every weekend I found an excuse to drive somewhere new, whether it was a nearby hiking trail or a farmer's market. Life, for once, felt calm and manageable. But then, in June, Rachel called. I hadn't heard her voice in months. Most of her previous attempts to reach me had been through brief, impersonal texts that I often ignored. This time, her tone was different. She sounded upset, almost defeated. Out of sheer curiosity, I answered. She asked if we could meet up for coffee, saying she had something important to talk about. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shut her down, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build. But another part of me was intrigued. What could Rachel, the golden child, possibly have to say to me that couldn't wait? So, I agreed. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her at first. Rachel had always been the polished one, the one who showed up looking like she had her life perfectly together, with her immaculate hair and flawless makeup. But today, she looked different. Tired. Frazzled. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, and her usual air of smug confidence seemed to have vanished. She was fidgeting with her cup when I approached the table, her fingers nervously tapping against the ceramic like she couldn't quite figure out how to start the conversation. When she finally spoke, her words caught me completely off guard. She told me that the car, the brand new, shiny vehicle that had caused so much tension between us, wasn't actually hers. It was in our parents' name. That little detail had been conveniently left out during the Christmas reveal. And as it turned out, there were strings attached. A lot of strings. She explained how Mom and Dad had been using her as their personal chauffeur. Grocery runs, doctor's appointments, picking up random items from the hardware store, she had become their go-to driver for every little errand. At first, she thought she was just helping out, but it quickly became clear that she had no say in the matter. They treated the car like it was theirs, dictating when and how it could be used. If she wanted to go somewhere for herself, she had to clear it with them first. On top of that, they'd started asking her for money to help cover the insurance costs. This, despite their earlier promise that they would handle all the expenses. Rachel admitted that she tried to push back, but their guilt trips were relentless. Every time she resisted, they'd remind her of how lucky she was to have been given a car in the first place. It didn't matter that she hadn't asked for it or that the gift had come with so many conditions, it felt more like a burden than a blessing. As I listened, a strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me wanted to laugh, to revel in the irony of it all. This was the same sister who had basked in their favoritism for years, who had brushed off my feelings as if they were insignificant. And now, here she was, realizing that their so-called generosity came at a price. A big part of me wanted to say, karma. But I didn't. Instead, I just listened. She kept going, her voice tinged with frustration in something that sounded a lot like regret. She admitted that she felt trapped, like she was being manipulated into staying under their thumb. "I think they only gave me the car to keep me around," she said at one point, her words heavy with resignation. "And I hate it. I feel like a chauffeur." It was a startling moment of honesty, one I hadn't expected from her. For the first time, she seemed to be seeing our parents in a different light. She wasn't just the favored child anymore, she was the one stuck paying the price for their control. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand why I had been so angry. When she finished, I asked her why she was telling me all of this. She shrugged, looking down at her cup like she couldn't meet my eyes. "I guess I realize they're not as perfect as I thought," she said softly. "And maybe you were right to be angry." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't the heartfelt acknowledgement I had secretly longed for all these years. But it was something. A crack in the facade. A glimpse of self-awareness from someone who had always seemed so oblivious to the impact her actions, and our parents' favoritism, had on me. I told her she needed to stand up to them, to set boundaries and take control of her own life. But I didn't offer to help. I wasn't interested in playing the savior, not for her and certainly not for our parents. I had spent too much of my life trying to shoulder responsibilities that weren't mine, trying to fix problems that other people had created. This was her mess to deal with, not mine. After we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. Rachel's admission didn't erase the years of hurt or the resentment I'd carried, but it did validate something I had always known deep down: the pedestal our parents had placed her on wasn't as stable as it seemed. Their favoritism had always been conditional, their generosity a means of maintaining control. And now, Rachel was experiencing that firsthand. Update 3. By the time Christmas rolled around again, I had settled into a rhythm of life that didn't include my parents. I hadn't completely cut ties, but I'd kept them at arm's length, communicating only when absolutely necessary. Rachel and I were still rebuilding whatever relationship we could salvage, though it wasn't without its awkwardness. She was trying, and I could see that, but the years of resentment between us didn't just disappear overnight. Despite that, she called me a few weeks before Christmas and asked if I'd consider coming to the family gathering. She said things had changed. She said our parents were trying to make amends, that they wanted to smooth things over after everything that had happened. I was skeptical, of course. I'd heard similar words before, promises of change that never materialized. But Rachel sounded hopeful in a way I hadn't heard before. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe I wanted to believe that change was possible, or maybe I was just curious to see if they would even try. When I arrived at the house on Christmas Eve, everything felt strangely normal. My parents greeted me warmly, their smiles a little too wide, their voices a little too cheerful, like they were overcompensating. Rachel was there, bustling around the kitchen, and for a moment, I let myself think that maybe this time would be different. The evening started off fine. We exchanged pleasantries over appetizers, and my parents were unusually polite, even asking questions about my job and my car like they genuinely cared. I thought, maybe, just maybe, Rachel was right. But then dinner happened. We were halfway through the meal when my dad cleared his throat in that deliberate way he always did before making some sort of announcement. Everyone stopped eating and looked at him. He glanced at Rachel, then said, "We've decided to sell the car." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Rachel's fork clattered against her plate as she froze, staring at him in disbelief. "You're what?" she managed to get out, her voice a mix of shock and anger. My mom jumped in before my dad could respond, her tone overly calm, like she was trying to downplay the situation. "We need the money for some house renovations," she said. "You can always use the family car if you need to go somewhere." It was like watching the floor drop out from under Rachel. Her face went pale, and for a moment, it looked like she was going to explode. But instead, she pushed back her chair and stood up. Without a word, she turned to me and gestured for me to follow her. "Can we talk outside?" she asked, her voice shaking. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and followed her out into the cold December night. The moment we were outside, the composure she'd been holding on to shattered. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she poured out everything she'd been bottling up. She told me how our parents had been controlling every aspect of her life since Christmas the year before. They dictated how she used the car, where she went, and how she spent her money. Every time she tried to push back, they guilt her into compliance, reminding her of how generous they'd been by giving her the car in the first place. She felt trapped, suffocated, like she was living under constant surveillance. "I can't take it anymore," she said, her voice raw with emotion. For the first time in a long time, I saw Rachel not as the golden child or the source of my resentment, but as someone who was just as much a victim of our parents' manipulative tendencies as I had been. I reached into my bag and pulled out my therapist's card, handing it to her. "You need to get out," I told her. That night, I didn't stick around for presents. I said my goodbyes quickly, ignoring the questioning looks from my parents, and left early. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel. She had always been the favored one, the one who got everything handed to her. But now, I realized that favoritism came with strings attached, strings that were now tying her down in ways I wouldn't have tolerated. A few weeks later, Rachel called me. She sounded different, lighter, freer. She told me she had moved out and was staying with a friend. She didn't go into much detail, but she said she'd finally had enough and decided to leave. For the first time in years, she sounded genuinely happy. In the months that followed, Rachel and I started to rebuild our relationship. It was slow, and there were still moments of tension, but we were trying. She opened up more about what she'd been going through, and I listened without judgment. It was strange, almost surreal, to see her in this new light. The Rachel I had grown up resenting was gone, replaced by someone who was learning, just like me, how to navigate life on her own terms. We even started to find moments of humor in the chaos of our shared experiences. One day, she joked about how we should go on a road trip in my car, just the two of us, no parents, no guilt trips. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page, not as rivals or opposites, but as sisters who had both been hurt by the same people and were finally learning how to heal. As for my parents, I've stayed no contact since that Christmas. I don't know if they've realized how much damage they've done or if they even care. And honestly, it doesn't matter. I've let go of the need for their approval, their apologies, or their recognition. My life is my own now, and I've built it in a way that brings me peace. The moral of the story, if there is one, is that family isn't always what you're born into, it's the people who choose to see you, support you, and grow with you. Sometimes, you have to step away from the people who hurt you, even if they're family. And sometimes, the people you least expect, like the sister you thought you'd never forgive, can surprise you in the end.